We all know risk is part of life, and if there is anything more certain than the prevalence of risk in business, it is only death. No one enters into a business venture without being aware of the risk. Some who are aware that with great risk comes great rewards accept the prevalence of risk and do less to try and avoid it. Others are more averse to risk and do their best to minimize it, knowing there will always be the possibility of failure. Not all events can be foreseen. But there is a small matter that is always overlooked. Risk is attached to the claims of others. But if what you have is at risk, then you are to that measure under communism. The essence of communism is the idea of communal ownership. Under the communist system, private ownership either does not exist or is a misnomer. Everything you have is yours only in a marginal sense, not literally. No one actually owns anything under communism. The trick that has been played on most of us is in having us believe capitalism is not a modification of the communist system. Most people of course assume communism came after capitalism. Marxism came after capitalism, but the world was communist for eons before capitalism came into existence. It is communism that hinders modern economies from developing, and it is communism that stopped third world economies from sharing in the Industrial Revolution. There really is only one problem in this world. We can summarize this problem as being parasitic, meaning being prone to live off of the avails of others. People do this for many reasons and through the use of many different tactics, but it all comes down to someone not willing to work for what he or she wants to enjoy. Behind this desire to live relatively free of cost, is sense of entitlement. The communist believes that he or she has a right to what exists, and this entitles them to share in the spoils without having the means to compensate the creator of the thing being enjoyed. The main culprit is the state. The state is the devil incarnate and the manifestation of the abomination of desolation. It is the father of lies because it either houses all wrongdoings or justifies or enables all evil done. This is a harsh statement, but it would be nigh on impossible for parasites to live for very long or to do much damage without the authority of the state legitimizing their parasitism. Let's make one thing clear, the non-parasitic person does not need the state. This might be difficult to believe at first, but imagine a population of persons who all work for what they get, and no one makes any claim on anything they did not create or have the means to pay for. If people make no claims on what was created by another, there is no risk in the economic sense. There is also no need for the state. However, we must not delude ourselves into thinking there was a time when parasitism was not a problem. The parasitic problem arose in Eden and has been with us since. Ancient and primitive cultures are not without parasitism, far from it. Primitive cultures do not progress because they have not been able to contain the parasitic element. Capitalists made an end run around them, not defeating but encouraging it and even justifying it, which led, not to the containment of parasitism nor even to a metamorphosis of parasitism but rather its transformation into two equally injurious forms. Unfortunately, this world has become totally ignorant about the left and right wings of politics and economics. Both claim the moral high ground, and both claim the other side are demonic, and both are right. The truth is that of two options both can be wrong, but both cannot be right, but on the other hand, that only applies to one continuum. If we're looking at two or more factors, then one can be right about one of these things and wrong about others. There is also another possibility, a person can be right morally but wrong ethically. You can take a right position on principle but then be wrong in how the position is implemented. But let's look at the specifics of the right and left so we can understand the issues. The right claims that all persons have a claim to the wealth in a community, and that if the community was moral, the wealth would be shared more or less equally. The right takes the position that if you produced something you ought to have a right to it, and the state really has no standing when it comes to the ownership of wealth. In this, both parties are right, that is, morally right. In principle, the arguments make good points. But as was said, their ethics are faulty. The community ought to share its wealth, but the right is right in that no one has the right to force a particular person to share what belongs to him regardless of how high and virtuous the principle. On the other hand, while it is true ownership is an inalienable right, we cannot contest this without losing all rights and the basis of all rules and law, we cannot claim what belongs to someone else. That ought to be obvious, but the right tends to make the argument for ownership based on an ethics that violates the very moral principle they attempt to justify. That is, while we have a right to own what we create, we have no claim on anything created by someone else, as that would contravene the very principle we strive to live by. But no one created anything physical, regardless of what that is, but God. Even if you feel better rejecting the God hypothesis, you are no better off, because mankind still did not create matter, space, or time. Therefore, anything composed of matter, in space and subject to time, does not belong to mankind. The state has no standing in this matter. The state cannot license matter nor transfer such licenses to any of its subjects. There is no ethical means by which anyone or any agency can claim rightful possession to matter, let alone transfer in whole or in part such property to other or another human being. Therefore, we seem to have a problem, as the earth does not belong to anyone nor can anyone develop a legitimate legal pathway to ownership. Thus all claims to any part of earth by any human or agency is fictitious, evil, and without merit. Those who make such claims have no standing, because standing would require a feasible pathway to ownership, and for mankind, there is none. However, we can own what we as humans create. We are made in God's image and God is a creator. Mankind also is a creator unless he is in the flesh and under another master. Men cannot create physical things. We manipulate matter to make new configurations, but the new configuration has a cost in the loss of potentiality. A new configuration loses the ability to be reversed. We cannot just decide we made mistake and start over again. We cannot own the thing in itself, the matter that composes the thing made. On the other hand, this was no made without the expenditure of energy. All new creations are made through the agency of work. God modeled this truth in the act of creating the world. We add value to the things of God. We own this value. The things created by God and owned by God are called assets. The portion owned and created by us is equity. Equity can and is represented by preferred shares. Common shares represent the assets of a business. Preferred shares represent the equity added to the assets. Preferred shares quantify the equity created and so can be adapted as a form of currency. Risk is created when two claims are made against the same asset. These claims are always illegitimate and so all risk represents a fraudulent claim, and indeed we can assume that every instance of risk represents a claim made by a criminal in reference to the property acquired by a scam artist. This can be demonstrated by every mortgage held by every individual and corporation. The buyer puts down a deposit on a property, and the bank pays off the balance owed and acquires a lien on the property. The owner passes the property over to the new owner in accordance with the law following the steps required by the relevant legislation. The deed itself is a license issued by the state that entitles the owner to specific rights as expressed in law. The new owner has rights to the property, as does the bank and as does the state. These three parties, all with identities provided by law, have standing before the law as regards the disposition of the said property. All three are exposed to risk because of the claims and standing of the other two parties to the deed. The creation of risk was a long and complicated process, whereas the ending of risk is a relatively simple process. We have already established that risk is predicated on evil people making illicit claims to things they had no hand in creating. Therefore, to eliminate risk is a simple matter of stopping the government from legitimizing and indeed, aiding and abetting, parasitism. The only way to eliminate business risk is to eliminate liabilities, that is, people making claims to what was created by another. A liability is an additional claim made against what is already owned. Our claim to physical assets represents a liability and is therefore, inherently risky. Only God owns the natural world, but we own the value we add to these assets. No one has a claim to anything created by God nor to anything created by another person. Scripture has the solutions and indeed, is the solution because God understands ownership. There is a solution to this evil system given in Scripture. Risk can be obviated by following the truths of Scripture. A simple tweak to the business model eliminates liabilities and restores viability. This model can be adopted by any business or community or nation. The biblical solution works with people from anywhere and with any number of persons, as few as 3 up to the entire global population. Best of all, it is free to use. The crucial step that must be taken is to stop claiming things that do not belong to us and start paying those who create the value, the full value of what they earned. If we take this one, simple step, the state will no longer be needed, and free riders will no longer plague us. With no state and no free riders, risk no longer exists. We take this step with a few close friends and people we trust. Help one another, paying all those who help the full value of the help they provide. Use a time units. An hour of time is given a value of say 20 units. Those who help for an hour receive 20 time credits. It is as simple as that, and it builds from there.